Good evening, Trinidad and Tobago. It is 8 p.m. right here in Sweet TNT, and it's time for Indaba, where knowledge grows. Very excited for this evening's conversation because, as you know, it's always insightful, always a place to learn. Fantastic conversation talking about Africa, CARICOM Day, and so much more. Going to hand you over now to the fantastic panel, starting off with none other than Reverend Kwame.
A very pleasant good evening, and thank you so very much, 91.1 FM Talk City. In particular, a very fabulous host on tonight, Natasha, doing quite a remarkable job. Per her advice, we do have another scintillating episode of Indaba, the place where knowledge grows, the place where we find consensus, certainly the voice of the Emancipation Support Committee, and absolutely the voice of the people. On tonight, as promised, we have quite a fantastic special guest, no less a person than the ambassador of Barbados to CARICOM, in His Excellency David Commission. We'll be talking about Africa CARICOM Day. And to set the tone, YouTube, to set the tone, Facebook audience, to set the tone, Talk City, we are going to allow for two very important sounds. One of them is the CARICOM song, otherwise known as the CARICOM Anthem. That is going to be quickly followed by the African Union Anthem. Following those anthems as played and presented by our technical staff, we'll get right into the meat of what is Africa CARICOM Day all about. Where did it come from? What was the brainchild behind it? What took place on that fateful day when the African Union and the best and brightest leaders of CARICOM came together? And then beyond that, what are the practical things that came out of this amazing summit? And then last but not least, we'll be delving into, of course, what is the potential? What is the future? What does the future have in store for us as an African people, those at home, and yes, we, the amazing, beautiful people in the diaspora? So without further ado, technical staff, over to you for the playing of the CARICOM song, also called the CARICOM Anthem.
Distant lands, our forefathers came, some seeking adventure, some bound in chains. Through battles waged and fought, through victory and pain, by test of their courage, our freedom was gained. In homage to those gone before us, the heroes of lands in the sun, we vow to join hands and to focus on building one Caribbean. Raise your voices high and sing of your Caribbean pride. Loud and strong, feel our hearts beat as one. Celebrate in song as we rise to heights where we belong. Sound the victory drum for CARICOM. Though great and diverse be our ethnicities, the bonds that unite us are stronger than these. We dine, we pray, we love, we dance and we play. We relate to each other, rest in your way. Raise your voices high and sing of your Caribbean pride. Sing it loud and strong. Feel our hearts beat as one. Celebrating song as we rise to heights where we belong. Sound the victory drum. Oh, Caracon, hele, hele, bravo. Oh, pour your sting, Caracon. Leve, leve, wow. Hele, hele. Tabo, ya tabo, awo. Knock your drum, Caracon. Leve, leve, wow. Let us all unite and celebrate together the victories won for our liberation. Let us dedicate ourselves to rise together to defend our liberty and unity. All sons and daughters of Africa, flesh of the sun and flesh of the sky, let us make Africa a tree of life. Let us all unite and sing together to uphold the bonds that frame our destiny. Let us dedicate ourselves to fight together for lasting peace and justice on earth. All sons and daughters of Africa, flesh of the sun and flesh of the sky, let us make Africa the tree of life. Let us all unite and toil together to give the best we have to Africa, the cradle of mankind, the font of culture, our pride and hope at break of dawn. All sons and daughters of Africa, flesh of the sun and flesh of the sky, let us make Africa the tree of life.
Indeed, how extremely beautiful those songs were. Again, the former song being that of the CARICOM song, the official CARICOM song, very colorful and festive. It was actually a first for me looking at it. So kudos to the writer, to the singer, and all the persons that came together to allow for the CARICOM to have such an amazing song. The latter, again, being the African Union anthem. And so we move from the regional to the international, again, bridging, as it were, the Ethiopian Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, now called in a fantastic way through culture. But again, as promised, we have quite a fantastic guest on tonight. He needs no introduction within the Pan-African sphere and circles. We are talking about a Pan-Africanist veteran. We are talking about an Afrocentrist. We are talking about the chair of the Caribbean Pan African Network. We are talking about one of the major architects behind the Durban Declaration. We are certainly talking about one of the most formidable regional and international diplomats pushing forward the agenda for reparations, for repatriation, and yes, for African development. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me to welcome the illustrious and the most fantastic Ambassador David Commission. Welcome to Indaba on tonight.
Thank you, Brother Kwame. Thank you for those very kind words and coming at a good time after a long and hard day. Thanks. Pleasure to be
You,
here. Always a pleasure to be here. Always a pleasure to be with the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago. Sorry that I missed the Emancipation Festival in Trinidad and Tobago this year, but it's an event that I really love. I really love to come down to that Emancipation Village and just take in all the vibes and then go on that wonderful Emancipation March on the morning of 1st of August.
absolutely. And of course, this year, it was extra special. The presence of the Asante Hene, of course, Atumfo Osei Tutu the second, being a part of this year's festivities, certainly took it up a notch. So it wasn't the year to be absent, but I know that if you could, you would. Thank you so much for those kind words, because I know that it is celebrated throughout the region. As a matter of fact, it's now an international phenomenon, owing to what we started right here in Trinidad and Tobago. But in Trinidad, because we are the home of carnival arts, we tend to be a little extra. And we go the extra mile. Let's get right into the meat of course, tonight's conversation. For many persons, they are totally unaware that there is such a thing as an Africa CARICOM Day. Could you first of all tell us what was the brainchild behind this day? How did this day come to be? What was the mechanisms and machinations and the mechanics behind the inauguration of an Africa CARICOM Day? It's sorely needed, of course, to bridge relations, economic, social, cultural, and political between the African continent and the people. But how did this day come to be?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me say that Africa CARICOM Day is tomorrow. And we are going to be celebrating it in a big way in Barbados. At 8:30 tomorrow morning, we will have a flag raising ceremony at government headquarters. We will be raising the flag of the African Union and the flag of CARICOM, and we'll be playing those two beautiful anthems as well. We will have cultural presentations by singers, dancers, drummers, African drummers. We will have speeches, addresses by the acting Prime Minister of Barbados, by a CARICOM official, by a representative of the African continent. So it's going to be a great celebration tomorrow morning. And then tomorrow night, we have a live special on our national television station, where we're going to be linking with our ambassador in Kenya, our ambassador in Ghana, our honorary consul in Rwanda, with the manager of the African Export-Import Bank in Barbados, the office in Barbados, with Invest Barbados, Export Barbados, with the Ghanaian nurses who are currently living and working in Barbados, with UWI. So we are going to treat the Barbadian people to a multifaceted experience of our fast developing relationship with Africa and with the African Union. But so that is what is happening tomorrow, and we're excited about it. And the chair of CARICOM asks all CARICOM member states to celebrate the day, to have flag raising ceremonies, to issue official statements. and we have certainly taken that to heart in Barbados. But how did it start? Well, um, the heads of government of CARICOM and Africa determined at the first Africa CARICOM summit of 7th September 2021 that henceforth the 7th of September would be designated Africa CARICOM Day, that it would be celebrated in the Caribbean and across the African continent, and that we would seek to hold follow-up summits on that day. And where did all of that, where did that first Africa CARICOM summit come from? What was the genesis? Well, in 2019, the then president of Kenya, President Uhuru Kenyatta, visited the Caribbean, and he came to Barbados. He engaged with Prime Minister Motley, and it was during that engagement that the idea took hold that we should have a summit of African and CARICOM governments. And President Kenyatta offered to host the summit. And so he made that offer in 2019. And at the CARICOM Heads of Government Conference in Barbados in February 2020, our heads of government accepted President Kenyatta's offer to host such a summit. And so the summit was going to be in 2020. But you know what happened right after February 2020?
COVID-19.
We had COVID. And because of COVID, the summit was pushed back to September 2021. And instead of it being a face-to-face summit, it had to be a virtual summit. Nonetheless, it was a very historic summit because it was really the first time since we had achieved independence in the Caribbean and in Africa, and we had established the Organization of African Unity on the continent, and we had established our own CARIFTA and then CARICOM, but we had never come together in a heads of government summit that was specifically for the Caribbean and Africa. And so this was the first summit. So it was historic, and it really took us back to those early Pan-African beginnings, you know, the 5th Pan-African Congress in 1945, when the early nationalist activists and leaders of the Caribbean and Africa came together, George Padmore of Trinidad and Tobago, and Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, and all the others. And they planned this decolonization struggle, and Nkrumah went back to Ghana and led the struggle. And you know, and in 10 years' time, we had achieved virtually almost the entire decolonization of Africa and the Caribbean. So we were building on that history. And I must say, as I said, it was a very historic summit, and some very important decisions were made about building a partnership between Africa and the Caribbean, between the African Union and CARICOM. And we could go into some, a number of the things that were agreed upon. But one of the concluding agreements was to have every year an Africa CARICOM Day where we come together to celebrate ourselves, to celebrate our unity, to pledge ourselves to implement all of those wonderful decisions and agreements that we made. So we're going to use this day to educate our people, to reach our people with that message of Pan-African unity, particularly between the Caribbean and Africa.
Thank you so very much for that response. And for those again listening by way of a 91.1 FM, welcome. I am your host on tonight, Reverend Kwame Kamau, and we have in studios with us no lesser person than His Excellency, Ambassador David Commission. Of course, he is the Barbados ambassador to CARICOM, as well as the chair of the Caribbean Pan African Network. And tonight, rather, we are talking about Africa CARICOM Day, and we are making mention of it by way of it, of course, being a calendar event for tomorrow. Tomorrow, the 7th of September. And every year after that, we would be celebrating it. I want to ask a question, even as I shout out Aino and Cheryl Africa on Facebook and all of the others tuned in. I see you. We welcome you. I want to ask a pragmatic question for the people on the ground. Often, when they think about summits and when they think about conferences, there's a thinking. It's not an accurate thinking, but it's a thinking nonetheless. And I want to give you the opportunity to respond. And the thinking is this: these are persons who are coming together to have, as it were, ceremonial splendor, but very far removed are the things discussed at the level of these summits and conferences and fora pertinent, meaningful, relevant to our lives. We have challenges in terms of having to take 2 and 3 flights to get to Africa. We have problems and challenges in terms of access to capital. Some of us have land in Africa. Some of us have NGOs and projects in Africa, but the capital just isn't there to fund some of these meaningful projects. There are other issues on the ground in terms of if you were to make your way there by one means or the other, and you were to make a success of yourself, now that you're making your way back home, you are faced with double taxation. So as the common man laments the fact that he wants or she wants to develop a more rich and robust relationship with the continent and vice versa. Just today I was talking to a Pan-African colleague, and he was talking about his wife who actually works within the nursing field, and the fact that she wants to look at the greener pastures in terms of nursing and the healthcare sector in the CARICOM region. You spoke about, of course, Barbados, and I think it is Ghana that you mentioned, having such a relationship in terms of it. Tell me about some of the promises, some of the declarations, some of the commitments that were made on that historic day, September 7th, 2021, in terms of alleviating some of the challenges and the plights and the issues that are faced by the CARICOM people and the African people as we seek to bridge the gap.
Well, I think it is fair to say that the leaders who met at that summit in 2021 came there with a great sense of realism and a great sense of the critical issues facing their people. Remember, September 2021, we are still in the midst of the COVID crisis. Now, we in CARICOM, we got a serious wake-up call during the COVID crisis. You remember, COVID had hit, everybody was panicking all over the world. Every country, every government was trying to buy up medical supplies, medical equipment, vaccines. And our governments in CARICOM were trying to do similarly. But no one was taking us seriously. The orders that we were putting in for medical supplies and for vaccines, those orders were so small because, after all, the Caribbean is a small part of the world. And the big multinational medical corporations had no interest in our orders because all of the big countries were putting in their massive orders. And so we were simply being ignored and our people were at risk. And Africa came to our rescue. Africa said to us, look, CARICOM, we have something called the African Medical Supplies Platform, where we have put together a platform to engage the international market, not as individual African countries, but as a continent. Put your order onto our medical supplies platform. It will become part of our much larger continental African order. And so said, so done.
I'm going to ask you just to put a pin on that, even as I say to the 91.1 as it will FM audience. I know they're going to take a lot of break at this point. We are going to continue live via Facebook and YouTube. Again, we are live with His Excellency Ambassador David Commission, the Barbados ambassador to the CARICOM region. And tonight we are talking about Africa CARICOM Day. So you were at the point when I interjected, you were speaking to the fact that when they came, the context of the conference was that we were facing a global crisis because of our small size within the CARICOM, access to medical supplies, access to a voice on the world stage to be heard, and other issues were quite rife at the time. And so the stage was set such that African leaders coming from the continent and the CARICOM region, when they gathered together on that fateful day, they were ready to do business. Go right ahead, Your Excellency.
Yeah, no, I was saying that even before we had that summit, right, we had the experience that when we put our CARICOM order onto the African Medical Supplies platform, not only were we able to access the international market, but we were able to purchase the items at a much lower cost because of economies of scale. We were now part of a much larger purchase order, you see? So we benefited. So that taught us something, that there is tremendous benefit to be derived from a relationship with our African family, which Africa is a continent of 1.4 billion people, 54 nation states. And not only that, but in Barbados, at the height of the COVID, we brought in nurses from Ghana. When we had a shortage of medical personnel, nurses, we were able to turn to Ghana, and we brought in 95 nurses from Ghana. Since then, they have been replenished. There's still Ghanaian nurses working in Barbados today. In fact, their representative will be on the program tomorrow to celebrate Africa CARICOM Day. So, with that recent experience in mind, when the leaders met on the 7th of September 2021, the things that they agreed upon were things very practical and very relevant to the welfare of our people. So, for example, it was agreed we are going to have a weekly direct flight between Africa and the Caribbean. We're going to look at the possibility of removing visa requirements for travel between the two areas. A number of the CARICOM heads of government didn't say about looking at it. They said they called for it to happen. We are going to look at a double taxation treaty to provide for doing business in both regions. We are going to mobilize finance to finance trade and investment. And we are going to look at a public-private partnership to mobilize developmental finance for the people of the region. We're going to look at establishing an electronic platform for the exchange of news and information and programming, artistic and other programming between the two areas. So these were the reparations. For me, reparations is a very grassroots, down to earth.
Absolutely.
We're going to collaborate on reparations. So these were some of the very practical things that were decided upon. And I mean, we could examine to what extent we have worked on these decisions over the past 2 years, to what extent some of them have been implemented or we have made good progress on them. And yeah, we could look at that. I mean, I would remain critical. I don't think we have moved fast enough or that we have done enough, but we have made progress in a number of areas. But I think that yes, I have no doubt that you could point to summits and conferences in the past where we might have seen as if we were just going through the motions, that our leaders were not in tune with critical issues facing people on the ground. But I think COVID was a real wake up experience for all of our leaders. We became face to face with the possibility that we would be bereft of food imports
Mm.
to our region, and therefore we had to prioritize agriculture and food production. And thus, we now have in CARICOM this project that we call 25 by 25, the project to reduce our extra regional food import bill by 25% by the year 2025. Now, a wake up call
Yeah.
from COVID. So I think that you have to talk about a pre COVID and a post-COVID. I
And a
think the
post-COVID.
post-COVID, we are much more conscious of the very serious challenges that we face, and that we have to look to each other. So we look to ourselves in the Caribbean, but we also look to our family on the continent of Africa.
Absolutely. As you talked about that, I was looking at, and again, kudos to the Right Honorable Prime Minister of Barbados, always representing the region with such distinction. One of the things that she mentioned in a video that I was looking at on today is that in relation to climate crisis, we need two things: we need pace and scope. And so let's apply that to the whole business of this amazing summit. The brainchild of Uhuru Kenyatta visit to Barbados. It was taken seriously. The heads of CARICOM met in 2020 in February, discussed the idea, discussed the notion. It was green lighted, and they were to proceed in that same year to do it. Didn't happen, but however, as a result of COVID-19, nonetheless, however, in 2021, it did happen. So there's a difference between asking and answering. There's a difference between saying and doing. The talk and the walk. So they talked about some of these very laudable things. Talk to me about one or two action items that were actually, as it were, delivered since then, that would show to the Caribbean people that the post COVID intellectuals and heads of government and representatives, that they mean business, and the whole idea of pace and scope is quite relevant to you in the post COVID-19 experience.
Well, if I had to single out one achievement over the past 2 years as the most outstanding achievement, I would say it is the relationship that has been developed and continues to be developed with the African Export Import Bank. And again, that goes right back to COVID, because it was actually the African Export Import Bank, a unique public private entity in Africa, that was the foundation that provided the financial muscle for the African Medical Supplies Platform. So we got an introduction to the African Export Import Bank through that experience. Within less than 4 weeks after the summit in 2021, a team from the African Export Import Bank was in Barbados,
Wow.
beginning the discussion, and they have not left since then. So Um, over the 2 years, they have been involved with us in the Caribbean. They have been in discussions with our central bank governors to discuss how we could translate the African payments and settlement scheme to the Caribbean. This would be a way to organize our trade among the different CARICOM countries without having to rely too much on hard currencies, the US dollar and so forth. They're also in discussions with our CARICOM Development Fund to see how we could develop new financial instruments to leverage and mobilize a lot of the capital that is lying dormant in bank accounts all over the Caribbean, attracting virtually no interest. But even more importantly, they have actually set up a Caribbean headquarters. It's located in Barbados. It was
Congratulations.
established on the 4th of August, and they have allocated the sum of 1.5 billion US dollars to finance trade and investment between the Caribbean and Africa. And last year they held in Barbados the African Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum, active in October of last year. They brought 1,200 delegates from 41 different African countries to Barbados. We had a tremendous forum, and this year the follow-up forum is in Guyana on the 30th and 31st of October. We should all try to go to it. It was, brilliant experience. So I would say that this is probably the most concrete example of a success story. But even things like you referred to the Paris climate event conference. That was actually, although many people think it was President Macron's event, it was really a collaboration between President Macron and Prime Minister Motley. But I can tell you that Prime Minister Motley, coming out of that Africa CARICOM summit, she mobilized the African heads of government to all be there in Paris, so that we participated as a Pan-African collective in that summit. And she reported, she came back with a very powerful report about that summit, that summit kind of constituted, in her opinion, a kind of coming together of Africa and the Caribbean, the South, the countries of the South, in such a strong and decisive way that she felt that there was no going back now, that we had kind of broken some ice there. And we are very serious about this. This factors into our reparations campaign as well. We are very serious that we have to restructure the international financial institutions. We have to restructure this international economic and political order that has its roots in those centuries of slavery and colonialism, and into which our independent countries were inserted. When we finally became independent, we were inserted into that system in a structurally still exploitative and subordinate manner. And I think that our eyes have opened up. We are not going to put up with it. And just as we have launched the reparations campaign, this is part of reparations as well, that we must restructure these structures to make them more fair, more just, more supportive of our right to development after being systematically underdeveloped for hundreds of years, exploited. Europe developed itself at the expense of the underdevelopment of Africa and the Caribbean. That these structures must now support our right to development. So I'm saying that a lot of the impetus for all of that was formed on the 7th of September 2021 when our heads of government came together. And if you look at the decisions taken and reflected in the communique that came out of that summit, you will see that they committed themselves to a campaign to restructure that international economic order, those international financial institutions, to carry forward the reparations struggle, to demand the removal of sanctions against countries like Zimbabwe and Cuba, and I can go on and on. Very, very powerful communique capturing some really solid decisions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Let's train our attention to the African continent. There's a lot of disquiet these days, to put it that way. Some style what's going on in the former Francophone, well, actually, they are Francophone nations, former French colonies. Some style it coup d'etats, so to speak. Others style it, of course, revolutionary acts to shake off the vestiges of the remaining residues of neocolonialism in Africa. Tell me about the potential of the Africa CARICOM coming together relationship in its ability, again, its scope, the depth, the richness, the potentials that exist in terms of addressing issues as it relates to hostilities on the ground, as it relates to approaching multilateral and international agencies, whether you're talking about the OAS, whether you're talking about the United Nations, whether you're talking about other configurations. What potential in the remaining time that we have in the so-called, in a basketball game, there's the first, second, third quarter, and then there's the last quarter. Well, we are in the last quarter of tonight's radio program, so we've left some of the, I won't say best, but some of the more controversial matters for last, which speaks to the potential. We see what's happening. We see the maneuvers in terms of the restructuring of certain institutions. Again, kudos to Barbados for being host to the Afri-Exim Bank. It almost makes you want to get a Barbados passport and citizenship. One of these good days, I may be saying hello, neighbor, ambassador. That would be a wonderful thing. But we are making the point that a lot has been done, but let's speak to the potential, the coming together of this small sized institution called CARICOM, which has historically punched above its weight class, and this juggernaut of a continent, mineral rich, people rich, youngest population in the world, some of the most brilliant young scientific minds experimenting in all kinds of things coming out of Africa. What does that potential hold for us if we really come together and lock arms and do this business called Pan-Africanism together?
Well, when I heard about the coup in Niger, for example, and about the response of the ECOWAS, which was to immediately threaten an invasion of Niger, I said that I lamented the fact that we had not, over the last 2 years, implemented one of the decisions that was made at that summit in 2021 was that we were going to establish an African Union CARICOM Commission. We were also going to establish a forum of African and Caribbean territories and states. So I was lamenting the fact that we hadn't moved swiftly enough to put that kind of institutional structure in place between the African Union and CARICOM that would have provided a space for our CARICOM heads of government to sit in council with the African heads of government to discuss these critical issues of peace and so forth in Western Central Africa. Because I am certain, one of the main principles of CARICOM is that the Caribbean community, the Caribbean, must be a zone of peace. That we prioritize peace. And if there are any disputes within our region, they must be settled peacefully. We must practice a diplomacy of peace. So, for example, back in January 2021, when Juan Guaido declared that he was president of Venezuela, and immediately the US State Department recognized him as president, and it became clear to us. We immediately held an emergency meeting of CARICOM because it became clear to us that what was happening was that we were heading to some kind of military intervention in Venezuela. And we said, no, our region must be a zone of peace. There must be no military intervention. Whatever differences exist in Venezuela, they must be settled through negotiation and dialogue. No violence. And we sent 3 prime ministers to the UN, to the Security Council, etc. But the point is, I felt that ECOWAS had made a mistake by threatening invasion, and I felt that if we had had that commission in place where we could have come together and discussed, that we could have shared that perspective of a zone of peace and why a diplomacy of peace is so important. And we in the Caribbean, we have this vexed issue of Haiti, the crisis in Haiti, which we are struggling with. What a great thing it would be if we were able to call upon our African heads of government and council to lend their advice and their support and their solidarity in helping us to solve the crisis situation in Haiti. So the point is that in addition to economic development and cultural exchanges and all the rest of it, these difficult issues of making peace, these difficult issues of electoral democracy, of free and fair elections, of proper change of governments, these are issues that we can help each other with. I mean, you hear about an election in Gabon. There's no electoral observer team. There are all kinds of deficiencies in the election process. Well, we in the Caribbean community, we have an enviable international record for electoral democracy, for being able to run elections, free and fair elections, for being able to change governments constitutionally, regularly. As opposed to a leader staying in place for 40 years and appointing his successor family member. So we have strengths. Yes, you're right. I mean, CARICOM is a dwarf compared with the giant of Africa. But the Jamaicans have a saying, we little but we tallower. We still very small, but we have strengths. We have strengths that we could share with our African brothers and sisters. And they have strengths and they have resources that they could share with us as well. So this is why we need the partnership. And we simply need to implement those decisions that we in our wisdom made on the 7th of September 2021. It is all there. African Union CARICOM Commission. We even said that that would be an initial step towards an ultimate Africa, Brazil, Caribbean Diaspora Commission, an ABCD Commission. Africa, Brazil, Caribbean Diaspora Commission.
And with that, we take a pause. There's a caller on the line. Talk City, you are live. Go right ahead with the caller. Question or comment for the ambassador tonight. We can't seem to hear you. No audio at this time. Could you try again? Good night, Talk City. Good night, caller. I'm hearing something now.
It appears as though we're having a bit of an issue with this particular caller, but I will stand by and ensure that the next call comes through strong.
Thank you so very much. Really appreciate it. Ambassador, in the few remaining moments, and certainly if push comes to shove, we will go into what we call affectionately Indaba overtime. Hopefully we won't, keep you too long. We know that your responsibilities are many and varied. On the business of reparations, it's big business these days. There's been a number of developments taking place, not only regionally. We saw what happened with regards to the Trevelyan family stepping forward in Grenada recently. We've observed, of course, the apologies coming from the royalties of Europe, in the Dutch in particular. We have seen, of course, other overtures being made in relation to returning artifacts to West Africa, stolen artifacts. They're not coming as fast as we would like them, but we are seeing a move in that direction. We are seeing, of course, some 22 years coming out of the Durban Declaration, and thank you so much for being one of the major architects behind that, because so much has transpired since then. We are so much the better for it, including the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. And in the second session of that forum, there was a proposal made by your goodly self on behalf of Barbados, which speaks to the as it were, assembling of a special tribunal to deal with the whole issue of reparations, such that we can have a forum that is free and fair and free from fear and adjudicated properly. It seems that the caller has returned. So back to you, 91.1 FM. You are live.
The continent of Africa. I want to ask a question. Why it is Rwanda is an ally of America funneling arms to Rwanda, to Sudan, of this massive division right now? I got that from Al Jazeera on an African Council meeting, discussing that. They was discussing why it is that the Western Caribbean and the African diaspora is allowing and not saying anything to this constant funneling of arms to disrupt Sudan. And in the reference to the African Summit, the Sixth Pan-African Congress was to leave here by members of the NJAC, Jamaica. The whole CARICOM steering committee was to leave here, and they was banned by Eric Williams from leaving here, from leaving this country to go to the Sixth Pan-African Congress. In brothers like Carl Blackwood from Jamaica, Rosie Douglas, and this brother from Guyana who was killed, who wrote the book Grounded with My Brother. All these brothers were banned from going to tell the African continent how we were being treated in the 70s by governments who pretend to be black and had us go manner, and it still goes up to now. I thank this brother from Barbados. I'm glad to hear your voice, brother, and may you uplift and send a message to my sister, the president of the Caribbean, Mia Motley. That is a very
Thank you.
promising
Thank you so much. We
and
have a few
interesting.
moments left, and I would want him sufficient time to respond to you, of course, while the 91.1 FM audience, Talk City audience, is still with us. You
Thank
got
you
the
for
gist
allowing me
of
this
what he
time.
was saying. A very pleasant good night. Thank you again, Brother Balagoon, for that very invigorating and stimulating call. I'm sure you got the gist of what he was saying with regards to the Sudan issue, and then, of course, in relation to closer issues to our shores. I'm not sure how you'd want to respond to that, but the floor is yours. And while you are at it, any parting comments that you may have for the 91.1 FM audience, you can feel free to do that as well. I'm definitely sure that we're going to have to go into at least 5 minutes more on the overtime via Facebook and YouTube. But Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Well, the brother is right in its history about the Sixth Pan-African Congress. And that is why the summit in 2021 was so historic. Because, yes, we had lost time. We had lost time through folly, the kind of folly that took place that helped to make the Sixth Pan-African Congress a failure, probably to be quite honest. His comments about the arms. Well, I really can't comment on that. I mean, I would just say, we are even finding it difficult to stop arms coming into our own countries. In fact, even the president of the United States seemed to be powerless to stop arms circulating within his own country. So this business about arms and guns and the damage that they do as they circulate around the world is a very difficult issue that I am afraid I really don't have an answer to. But I want really to end on the issue of reparations, because at that 2021 summit, it was agreed that Africa and the Caribbean, that we would collaborate on reparations. In fact, the heads of government agreed. That summit was in 7th of September. The 20th anniversary of the Durban conference was coming up at the UN just about 2 weeks after. And they agreed that they would all go and participate at the UN in that 20th anniversary commemoration. And since then, we have only gone from strength to strength on reparations, because CARICOM has decided that the next phase in our reparations campaign really is to reach out to Africa and to bring Africa on board with us. And Africa has met us halfway, because in February of this year, at the African Union Summit in Ethiopia, they adopted a resolution on reparations, not only committing the African Union to pursuing reparations, but also committing to pursuing a partnership, a collaboration with CARICOM on reparations. And as you would know, Brother Kwame, we have been putting flesh to that bone. Just a few weeks ago, the African Union undertook a reparations study tour to the Caribbean, specifically to Barbados. It happened in Barbados, but we brought in all the relevant Caribbean reparations activists from Trinidad and Jamaica, all across the region. And we had a tremendous week-long meeting in Barbados. And so, yes, the partnership is taking shape. It is beginning to bear positive results. We are seeing a number of the positive results. This year is 10 years of our CARICOM reparations campaign. We started in 2013. So we are in a position now to look back on the last 10 years. And indeed, we are making progress. And I think it's only a matter of time, brother, before we are completely successful. We have a just and righteous cause, and we simply have to keep dedicated to it. We simply have to keep pursuing it in a very determined way, and we have to build that international coalition and bring in the 1.4 billion people of Africa and the 54 nations of Africa on board with us will strengthen our reparations campaign immensely.
Absolutely, absolutely. And with that, we would want to thank the 91.1 FM studio, Talk City, for being with us here live on Indaba, the place, of course, where knowledge grows, the voice of the people, the voice of the Emancipation Support Committee. We say a very pleasant good night to each of you, even as we continue for a few more moments. I want to acknowledge Dr. Claudius Fergus, who has sent his special greetings to you, Mr. Ambassador, on tonight. He finds you to be in fitting form on tonight as we engage tonight's discourse. There's a question, it's also reparations related. There are some questions that were formulated at the level of the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent in the first session. In the second session, those questions continued to resonate, as it were, very poignantly within the forum. And it's the question that has to do with the issue of the status of African people in the diaspora who were taken, as it were, prisoners of war from Africa and displaced in, of course, into the diaspora, of course, inclusive of the CARICOM. The question that has been asked is this: insofar as there is already at the level of the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent a plan to place certain key and fundamental questions before the ICJ for them to respond, as it were, to some really sensitive issues in relation to legal status and jurisdiction and jurisprudence. With regards to the study tour, I'm not sure to what extent you can speak to it, but do you see wisdom in the work that is being done now by amazing luminaries and Pan-Africanists like yourself to consolidate and to coordinate and to bring together all of the best and brightest ideas and minds that have placed certain things on the floor, inclusive of this ICJ request that is being made? Do you see any wisdom in collaborating and coordinating such that rather than the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent on the one hand asking a batch of questions and the study tour and whatever comes out of it asking perhaps secondary and tertiary questions, do you see the fundamental need for us within the African continent and the diaspora coming together so we can coordinate, so that we can collaborate, such that whenever we are facing multilaterals, whether it's ICC or whether it's ICJ, whether it's the United Nations or any other forum for that matter, we are doing so with one aim, one purpose, one vision, and one voice?
Yeah, well, those are things that are already agreed. In fact, one of the main panels during the study tour was the discussion on legal remedies and legal strategies. And we decided that we are going to establish a joint CARICOM Africa legal committee with some of the best minds to explore all of the legal strategies available to us. We have also decided that we're going to make much more use of the United Nations, because between the African Union and CARICOM, we constitute 68 members of the United Nations. We are about 1/3 of the membership of the United Nations. So that has all of those things have already been agreed in principle. As I said, we are taking our reparations campaign now to a higher level. After 10 years, the 10 years have laid the foundation. It is now, as a result of those 10 years of work, we now have a global reparations movement, and we are now poised to take it to a new level. And we propose to take it to that new level in partnership with our kith and kin of the continent of Africa. In fact, the next major event for us will be a major reparations conference in Ghana. It is likely to happen in November, and CARICOM will be supporting it fully. And then we are going to work towards a specific CARICOM African Union conference that will be specifically on reparations solely. So this is not just talk. I mean, we gone way past that now. This is really time for action, and victory. We have a calypso in Barbados by the mighty Gabi. He
Oh,
says,
I love Gabby. I love Gabby.
"Victory is certain. Victory is more than certain. Victory is certain, but it's just up to us. We have to see it through. We simply have to see it through with determination and passion, and victory is assured."
Oh, thank you so much. We end as we started. An idea that was born in 2019 by the former president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, visiting Barbados at the time, and of course, and CARICOM region by extension, speaking to the issue of a vision. Definitely a clear vision, a well articulated vision, and that vision was the coming together of the tiny, the itsy bitsy teeny weeny CARICOM region, which continues to produce Pan Africanists after Pan Africanists, from George Padmore to CLR James to Henry Sylvester Williams to Baba Nana, Kafra Kambon, absolutely yourself, an amazing stalwart within the Pan African movement, partnering the CARICOM region with the juggernaut that is the African Union. What began as a small idea, but with a big impact in 2019, came to fruition in 2021 on September, as it were, the 7th. And among all of the things that were discussed, direct flights to Africa weekly, bringing an end by way of financial arrangements to double taxation, making arrangements for communications and media, allowing for, of course, the reform and transform of better banking arrangements between the two regions, and among a number of laudable things. We have found 2 years later in 2023 that beyond the rhetoric, there has been reality. Beyond the talk, there has been walk. So throughout the Caribbean, whether you're in Barbados, whether you're in Grenada, whether in St. Lucia, whether you are in, as it were, Jamaica, whether you are in St. Kitts Nevis, whether in Antigua, Barbuda, we have so much to celebrate as a region as we partner across the Ethiopian Ocean with the African Union as we celebrate the Africa CARICOM Day. Your Excellency, parting comments for the Indaba listenership, the Indaba crowd, the Indaba audience. They have been participating, they've been salivating, off of everything that you've been sharing and saying on tonight. What are your parting words to the people of the CARICOM and even the continent that are tuned in tonight in relation to the way forward for our people in general, and in particular with respect to how we can allow for this amazing Africa CARICOM Day to grow and blossom and become certainly a day that can rival the crop overs and rival Trinidad's carnival and rival Labor Day? And how can we come together to see that be brought into reality?
Yeah, well, I would just say that success is within our hands. And that success is simply predicated on us developing unity, coming together as a Pan-African family. Tomorrow, one of the things that we hope that will happen tomorrow is that there will be a virtual signing of a memorandum of understanding between the African Union and CARICOM. It will be signed by the chairperson of the African Union Commission and the Secretary General of CARICOM. That is expected to be the highlight of tomorrow's commemoration. And that is a step towards the unity, that African Union Commission, that Forum of African and Caribbean Territories and States. If we could just do that, if we could just put those structures in place to deliver us that unity, to deliver us those spaces where we come together periodically to sit in council with each other, our success is really assured, is guaranteed. So I would say Let us go forward with that sense of confidence, and let us look forward tomorrow to a brilliant and meaningful and joyous Africa CARICOM Day. We know that maybe not everybody will be celebrating it tomorrow because it is still relatively new. You're still getting the word out there. But those of us who know, let us celebrate it in a meaningful and joyous manner, and let us build this day. Let us go on from here year after year and build this as a very special day in which we come together to celebrate our Africanness, our unity, and to keep focused on the agenda, the unity agenda that is going to bring us success and victory. Happy Africa CARICOM Day, Trinidad and Tobago, and all across our Caribbean region.
Oh, thank you so much. And with that, we say a very pleasant good night to the loyal followers by way of YouTube and by way of Facebook. Thank you for joining us for yet another edition of Indaba, the place where knowledge grows, the voice of the Emancipation Support Committee, and certainly the voice of the people. I have been your host for tonight. It's a rare occasion where I'm the singular host, so I want to send a very special good night to my co-host in Dr. Claudius Fergus, and to the Pan-African activist brother Shabaka Kambon. A very special good night to the two of you, wherever you are in the world right now. We are signing off for now, but we are not out of faith. We are not out of love, and we are absolutely not out of words. But for tonight, we are absolutely out of time. Until the next edition, a very pleasant good night and goodbye for now.